This was a team that you should have dominated. You've now lost 4 straight. You're heading into the playoffs and you're searching for answers, not just in terms of your offensive line, but your quarterback now.
I just don't see this team peaking at the right time. It was almost like we were anointing Mike Tomlin as the best coach in the NFL 12 or 13 weeks in. Then once they got to the real competition and the attrition started to settle in, it's just not a good football team.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
I remember one time, I don't know if Kenny will remember this, I said put 100 on, I think I left it on a text, put 100 on this horse that won, and then Kenny called me back later and goes, hey, I never got the text. And I'm like,
no.
Oh, yeah. Remember that, Kenny?
I would never stiff anybody. He texted me as they're loading into the gate, maybe, like, it's too late.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Two guys that can do it all.
Too much electricity this morning.
This is a good time. We're having a lot of fun.
I had to do a triple take. Ka-ching! Why? Because of parity.
I didn't mean to offend.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Load management is a dirty word.
Let him rip.
You know what? Circumstances provide the results.
What? How do you do this one?
Oh, Donnie, you got such a good show there.
A network that is booming.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Hello and welcome to a Tuesday Live right here on the Early Line on SportsGrid and all across the SportsGrid network. That includes sportsgrid.com/watch, where you can find your favorite destination to consume everything all across the grid. He is Joe Ranieri. I am Ben Stevens. We are here together for the next 3 hours up until 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Joe, on a Tuesday where the coaching carousel around the National Football League continues to spin. There are 18 teams already beginning their offseason and their plans for the future of their franchises. There are 14 teams around the National Football League that are in postseason preparation time, getting ready for the start of the playoffs in just a few days. We will preview all 6 matchups, taking a look at the early lines here on a show called The Early Line for everything we will see during Super Wild Card Weekend. We are now just 2 days away from the semifinal round in the college football playoff. Thursday night in Miami, the Orange Bowl between Notre Dame and Penn State. Friday night in the heart of Texas, the Cotton Bowl between Texas and Ohio State. We'll break down those games as well. Go all around the association. So much NBA action. College basketball as conference slates really starting to pick up around the nation. So much to get to here, Joe Ranieri, in these next 3 hours.
It really is, and who knows, Ben, maybe Black Monday extends into Black Tuesday or Wednesday here, because I don't think the changes are done just yet in the NFL.
A couple of expected changes, or maybe rumored or speculated moves that franchises might make, have not happened. The only 2 firings we really got yesterday, really just one firing in Doug Peterson, and the Jaguars retaining Trent Baalke, which might have been even bigger news, and the retention in New York of both Brian Daboll and GM Joe Shane. A lot to get to around the NFL. And, Joe, that starts with a team that made a franchise-altering move midway through the season when Chicago fired head coach Matt Eberflus. Interim coach Thomas Brown, a victory over the Packers in the regular season finale for Chicago. A little bit of optimism entering the offseason, but a disappointing year in the Windy City. So who is next up to be the head man of this storied Bears franchise? A lot of reports. Ben Johnson, the OC for the Detroit Lions. But yesterday, a surprising report. The Bears have formally requested to interview Dallas head coach Mike McCarthy. I say Dallas head coach Mike McCarthy for the next week as his contract expires at the Star next week, and then the Bears can interview him, and not just Cowboys head man McCarthy, but former Green Bay Packers head coach Mike McCarthy as well. Joe, what do you make of the Bears potentially interviewing Mike McCarthy in just a few days?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, an interview request doesn't guarantee that he's getting the job. But what it does show Jerry and Dallas is that there's going to be interest in Mike McCarthy if you let him walk out the door. And I think however long Jerry was planning on dragging this out, he's going to have to make a decision sooner rather than later. And this could only help McCarthy with the negotiations with Dallas at this point. It'll be interesting to see. I'm not really sure why they need permission to talk to him since he's not under contract in 24 hours. But it'll be interesting to see how it turns out.
Just wait a few days, and then Mike McCarthy is a free agent. Now to teams in the postseason. Tough injury news for the Green Bay Packers in that finale against Chicago. Christian Watson is feared to have torn his ACL. He will have season-ending surgery. He will not be with the Pack for the remainder of the postseason. However, Jordan Love, who exited the game in the opening half with an elbow injury, is expected to be good to go as the Packers will play on Sunday afternoon in Philadelphia against the Eagles.
Yeah, tough loss for them there. Obviously, that's not how they wanted the season to end. That's not, they would have loved to have gone into any playoff situation with a full complement of players, but that's just not the way it's going to happen. And by the way, not exactly playing their best football heading into the postseason either, which is troubling for Green Bay.
All three of our games on the NFC side of things during Super Wildcard Weekend expected to be relatively close and competitive, but the Packers, the largest underdog, catching 4.5 points as they head to Philly. Big day in the NBA yesterday. 9-game slate around the association. And the Sacramento Kings, with interim head coach Doug Christie, have now won 5 in a row. A double overtime thriller in Sacktown last night as the Kings outlast the Miami Heat 123-110. Sacramento closing as a 3.5-point home favorite. They cover that number. Lost the first game with interim head man Doug Christie. Now have won 5 straight. That's a season-long winning streak for those Kings in California's capital.
And it was the second night of a back-to-back and the second straight win without their star point guard, De'Aaron Fox here. And on the flip side, Miami is an absolute mess. And I am shocked Pat Riley allowed it to get to this point. But here we are, Miami. You're a 500 team at 17-17.
Literally 500. And Miami did lead by about 17 points with about 8 minutes left. Sacramento stormed back. DeMar DeRozan, a 30-piece last night. 9 of the 11 points scored by the Kings in double OT. Bradley Beal making history in his NBA career, coming off the bench for the first time in 9 years, nearly a decade, but scored 25 to lead Phoenix to a victory in Philadelphia, snapping a 4-game slide for the Suns. You see that final score there, a victory in Philly for Phoenix last night, 109-99. They closed as a slight 1.5 favorite on the road.
Yeah, and that line was the other way, too. I mean, with the idea that Embiid was playing, they were 3.5, almost a 4-point favorite, the Sixers. But when it was announced he was out, that closed as the pick'em. And boy, oh boy, Phoenix finally played a complete game. And oh yeah, Bradley Beal coming off the bench was an interesting look for the Suns last night as well.
And Devin Booker wasn't great. 3 of 16, team best 25 points scored by Bradley Beal. From the NBA to college hoops, not many top 25 teams in action on a Monday, but number 12 Houston was in a Big 12 battle at home against TCU. Well, the Horned Frogs figured out what Kelvin Sampson and his Cougs do better than most, and that's defend the crap out of the basketball. 65-46, the victory for Houston last night. 7th consecutive win for the number 12 team in the country. Total last night was 128 and a hook. It still stays under. Houston wins by 19, Joe. they were an 18.5-point favorite against TCU.
Yeah, it opened 19.5, Ben. It was actually bet down to 18.5. So that's why we always say get the best of the number because every half point matters. And it mattered last night for Cougar backers.
An FCS national championship on the line last night in Frisco. North Dakota State and Montana State. The Bobcats, hoping for their first FCS crown since 1984, found out who the true powerhouse remains to be in FCS college football. North Dakota State wins a wild one with a walk-off punt from Caden Steindorf to win 35-32. The Bison win their 10th FCS national championship. No other program has more than 6. 10 FCS titles in the last 14 years. There are dynasties, and then there is North Dakota State football. Tim Polasek in his first year as the head coach for NDSU. Polasek leads them to a national championship in year 1 in Fargo.
Yeah, as a dog, no less, which is interesting. As they closed the 3.5-point dog there, the over went over, in fact, but a wild one, Ben, that's for sure.
A lot of points in that fourth quarter to push to the over of 58.5. Some MLB hot stove news. The Cincinnati Reds acquire Gavin Lux, the infielder from the L.A. Dodgers. There's your update in baseball. Now, as we go to the coaching carousel around the National Football League, all the updates you need on the other side of the break.
I don't like to toot my own horn, and I know that I'm setting myself up for probably disappointment later tonight, but I hope you were with us last week on the Final Five, because we almost swept the board. We had 2 out of 3 on the power play points with Reinhardt and Matthews. We hit the goal scorer line A. We hit the side with Washington. We hit the total with the over in Toronto and Buffalo. So we had a really good Final Five last week, and I'm hoping that we can now ride that wave.
Only on SportsGrid.
50 points in a fourth quarter for the Atlanta Hawks. Like, what is going on? It's like circus numbers. What are we doing?
And we sound like 2 old heads complaining. It's a tough watch. It's a tough watch sometimes. I don't mind the shooting. I just know the numbers. Like, when you strictly look at it from the numbers in betting, it's getting really hard to bet.
Game time decisions. Only on SportsGrid.
Louis Riddick has interviewed for every job in North America. And I'm not just talking football. I'm talking about every business in North America of any kind whatsoever. Tire companies, grocery store CEOs, shopping malls, insurance companies. What job hasn't Louis Riddick interviewed for?
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
The NBA will take center stage once football stops, and people will watch the NBA playoffs and all that. But the standings are whacked out in the Western Conference. Like Oklahoma City, Memphis, and the Houston Rockets are the best teams in the conference.
You want to talk about a team with overs and no defense? The Wizards are your team. It's unbelievable. They can't make a total high enough. It's nuts.
Sports Rage tonight. Weeknights 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Only on SportsGrid.
Live right here on a Tuesday morning on the early line on SportsGrid. It is the day following, the day after the end of the NFL regular season, a Monday following the final weekend slate of the regular season known as Black Monday, where a lot of head coaching jobs are up for grabs and maybe in changing hands. We really only saw one dismissal on Monday. That was early on Monday morning. Doug Peterson being let go after 3 years in Duval County in a 22-29 record. But outside of that, the biggest news of the day was the Giants holding on to Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen. That can be a part of the carousel as well, Joe Ranieri. All of the moving parts, even when those parts are staying in the same place. We know the Chicago Bears are looking for a new head coach, firing Matt Eberflus back in the regular season. And as we got word yesterday from ESPN's Adam Schefter, the Bears have sought permission to interview Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy and are awaiting a response from Dallas. If the Cowboys don't allow permission this week, no worries. The Bears could interview McCarthy after his exclusive negotiating window with Dallas expires on January 14th. That is exactly 1 week from today. His exclusive negotiating window, what is that legal jargon? It just means that Mike McCarthy no longer has a contract with the Cowboys organization as of next week.
The whole thing is very, very weird. But to be fair, the Bears also requested interviews from, I believe, Todd Monken. So there's a few guys there still. Well, they seem to be interviewing everyone like the Jets do here. But I'm going to be very interested to see if this moves the needle with Jerry. Does this make Jerry want to hurry up and maybe sign him, work out a deal? It wasn't like Jerry set him up for success. I mean, they didn't do anything in the offseason to improve the roster, but they also didn't extend him. So I don't know what any of it means in Dallas with Jerry calling the shots right now.
And that's the key, Joe. And that was one of the biggest storylines in my estimation entering this 2024 NFL season. The offseason fiasco that was Dallas. They didn't acquire a new running back to really replace Tony Pollard or the shell of Ezekiel Elliott for a very, 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 very long time, even deep into training camp and in the preseason with the regular season on the horizon. Dak Prescott was unpaid. CeeDee Lamb was unpaid, understanding that Micah Parsons' pay tab would be on the horizon this offseason as well if they wanted to be shrewd in their financial decisions and get in front of it. But outside all of that, it was the fact that head coach Mike McCarthy was on the warmest seat we have ever seen in the NFL. That if this season was a failure, and it was, I guess you could point to the quarterback injuries for Dak Prescott and say that was the reason. Even with Dak in there, it was a disaster in Dallas. That if Mike McCarthy stumbled, he would not be brought back. Jerry made that very clear at the end of last year's first-round exit, losing at home to the Green Bay Packers in 13 postseason trips since 1995, the Cowboys' last Super Bowl, without even reaching the NFC Championship game. So I'm not exactly sure what the plan is for Dallas, except the same thought, Joe, that we all had entering the year, that Mike McCarthy has coached his last game as the Cowboys' head coach. But now there's some reports that maybe Jerry is having the confidence in McCarthy once again.
Yeah, I can't wait to see because there's still a lot of holes on this roster. Now, again, Ben, if you're willing to give him, all things being equal, I'm willing to give with all the injuries on the defense and offensive side of the ball this year that Dallas had to go through and all the question marks and everything else, I'm willing to give McCarthy the benefit of the doubt and say, listen, a lot of the reason why this team was as bad as they were in many stretches really had nothing to do with Mike McCarthy. I can make that argument, but whether or not that moves the needle with Jerry remains to be seen.
Right, and that's the case, Joe. It wasn't all on Mike McCarthy this year. A lot of outlier factors, if you will, but it still is a dismal season for the Dallas Cowboys. So as we said, Black Monday not nearly as bleak as it often can be, but on Sunday afternoon, after the Patriots beat the Bills at home in their season finale to squander the chance to draft first overall or at least acquire a ton of draft assets for that first overall pick, Robert Kraft made the move to fire Gerard Mayo after his only year as the head coach of this Patriots organization. Here was the owner of the Pats yesterday on what lies ahead in this offseason and the reasons behind his decision.
I'm going to be very brief here and say this whole situation is on me. I feel terrible for Gerard because I put him in an untenable situation. I know that he has all the tools as a head coach to be successful in this league. He just needed more time before taking the job. In the end, I'm a fan of this team first, and now I have to go out and find a coach who can get us back to the playoffs and hopefully championships.
I mean, I guess it's refreshing to hear the owner take some onus. I disagree with the notion Gerard Mayo was not ready to be a head coach. He was a longtime defensive assistant under Bill Belichick. If you said you set him up for failure, that's true. He was the scapegoat between a legend who was there for 2.5 decades in hoping to be better. The Patriots won 4 games this year. Not a good season. Second consecutive year in Foxborough, only winning 4 games. That's unheard of for this Patriots organization that we have known over the last 2 decades. But Joe, the win total for New England entering the year was the lowest in the NFL at 4.5. It wasn't like Gerard Mayo was a disaster as a head coach in his debut season.
I would have rather he just go up to the podium and say, we're going to make this brief. I'd like to welcome Mike Vrabel back to the Patriots family as the new head coach of the Patriots. Like, what are we doing here? Like, stop spitting in our face and telling us it's raining here, Ben. You don't make this move if you don't know that Vrabel wants the job. Let's be honest here.
And that is really it. From one former Patriot linebacker to another, that will probably be the next news conference we see in New England. More NFL headlines next. Statement from Giants president John Mara. Joe Shane and Brian Daboll will continue in their respective roles with the organization. As disappointing as the results of the season have been, Steve Tisch and I remain confident in the process that Joe and Brian have implemented.
The Giants, an absolute train wreck, and I love it.
The Early Line. Only on SportsGrid.
This was a team that you should have dominated. You've now lost 4 straight. You're heading into the playoffs and you're searching for answers, not just in terms of your offensive line, but your quarterback now.
I just don't see this team peaking at the right time. It was almost like we were anointing Mike Tomlin as the best coach in the NFL 12 or 13 weeks in. Then once they got to the real competition and the attrition started to settle in, it's just not a good football team.
Pro Football Today. Only on SportsGrid.
The NBA will take center stage once football stops, and people will watch the NBA playoffs and all that. But the standings are whacked out in the Western Conference. Like Oklahoma City, Memphis, and the Houston Rockets are the best teams in the conference.
You want to talk about a team with overs and no defense? The Wizards are your team. It's unbelievable. They can't make a total high enough. It's nuts.
Sports Rage tonight. Weeknights 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Only on SportsGrid.
Louis Riddick has interviewed for every job in North America. And I'm not just talking football. I'm talking about every business in North America of any kind whatsoever. Tire companies, grocery store CEOs, shopping malls, insurance companies. What job hasn't Louis Riddick interviewed for?
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
It is coaching carousel time in the National Football League, and not just head coaches, but assistant coaches, otherwise known as coordinators. And a couple were fired and let go from their franchises yesterday. A couple of very familiar faces. First in Cincinnati, one time one of the hottest DCs in all of the NFL, Lou Anarumo, after the Bengals mightily struggled on the defensive side of the football, which ultimately cost them a playoff berth. was let go yesterday in Cincy. Gus Bradley, defensive coordinator in Indianapolis, a really bad year defensively for the Colts. He was fired as well. Ryan Grubb, in his first year in Seattle, the offensive coordinator a year ago with the Washington Huskies under Kalen DeBoer, that was going to follow DeBoer to Tuscaloosa before being hired in the Northwest by Mike McDonald and those Seahawks, also fired yesterday. And early yesterday, or maybe even Sunday, I think it was Sunday because the Browns played on Saturday, Ken Dorsey let go by the Cleveland Browns as well.
Yeah, the thing that shocked me the most was the Lou Anarumo, who will be unemployed for about 30 minutes, Ben. Yeah. I can already imagine the phone lighting up here on teams that will take him. As if it's his fault that Cincinnati organization backed themselves in a corner and decided, well, we have to pay receivers and Joe Burrow, and, well, we can't afford anybody on the defensive side of the ball, so go ahead, Lou, have a good time with this. That's just a precursor to Taylor being the next one that's tossed. That's usually how this sequence works.
It's almost like you have to do something when the season is that disappointing, and Lou Anarumo was the guy to get got. Some reports entering the regular season finale on Sunday that multiple NFL teams are inquiring about Kevin O'Connell's contract and his job status, maybe hoping to trade. Yeah, you heard that correctly. Trade for the Vikings head coach. I guess that's what happens when you lead Minnesota to a 14-win season with Sam Darnold as your quarterback. Kevin O'Connell saying yesterday that Minnesota, being in the Twin Cities, is exactly where he wants to be. An interesting situation nonetheless.
Yeah, it almost as if his the agency representing him somehow got a story leak that people want to trade for him just before they begin negotiating an extension on his contract. Funny how that works there, Ben, like that story. Shocking.
Listen, PR departments of agencies, they work overtime, and they work very, very well. Ezekiel Elliott wants to play for a contender. That's not the Cowboys. Signed to the Chargers practice squad. We'll see what that means. Former Buckeye with Jim Harbaugh? Interesting development there. Deshaun Watson reportedly suffering a setback rehabbing his Achilles. Joe, that's important, not because Deshaun Watson is expected to be the starter week number 1 any longer for the Browns, but if he were to miss 2025, if he is not physically ready, it saves the Browns a huge burden in terms of the money that Watson is owed.
Yeah, and I would expect him not to be available come the start of next season here, Ben. There is a lot going on behind the scenes with this, that's for sure.
I'll just say, the real thing is that's the story, the memes of Andrew Berry, the GM for the Browns, picking up Watson from rehab and dumping him down the stairs. That was rather humorous. Joe, as you made mention, too, it almost feels like the coaching carousel is really just starting to spin. Some moves we might have expected or speculated during the regular season, even at the end of it, haven't happened, including in Las Vegas for first-year Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce. How comfortable does Pierce feel about his job? Let's hear from the guy himself.
I'll ask you again, do you have any clarity on what's happening next year about your job status?
I haven't been told anything different.
Do you want to get that cleared up ASAP, or do you?
It's only coming from the outside. It's not inside the building. So, to me, there's nothing clean up until I hear it from inside the building.
Joe, what do you think? Is Antonio Pierce going to be coaching in Sin City to start 2025?
Probably, unless, again, see, here's the problem, Ben, is that how many quality upgraded coaches, right? The devil you know is better than the devil you don't. How many quality coaches are there that would be an improvement over Pierce that actually want to work for the Davis family?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, right? And the players tend to believe in Antonio Pierce. It's why he was elevated from interim to permanent head man last offseason as well. Plenty more around the National Football League. Time to talk about the Jets next.
I know people are getting after Cole Anthony. Folks, it was a bang-bang play. You know, you got to give Cole Anthony props for diving on a loose ball. Yeah, was it a little bit, reckless? Maybe. But at the end of the day, for people to go after Cole Anthony and think this is a dirty play, you don't know ball.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid. The Bostonian versus the Book.
I remember one time, I don't know if Kenny will remember this. I said put 100 on, I think I left it on a text. Put 100 on this horse that won, and then Kenny called me back later and goes, "Hey, I never got the text." And
Oh,
I'm like,
no.
Oh yeah. Remember that, Kenny?
I would never stiff anybody. He texted me as they're loading into the gate, maybe. Like, it's too late.
The Bostonian versus the Book.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
The two guys that can do it all.
Too much electricity this morning.
This is a good time. We're having a lot of fun.
I had to do a triple take. Ka-ching! Why? Because of parity.
I didn't mean to offend.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Load management is a dirty word.
Let him rip.
You know what? Circumstances provide the results.
What? How do you do this once?
Oh, Donnie, you got such a good show there.
A network that is booming.
The Early Line. Only on SportsGrid.
Live right here on this Tuesday on the Early Line on SportsGrid. So much to update you around the National Football League. Later on in the show, we begin our previews and breakdowns, the early lines on the Early Line for the playoffs beginning around the NFL. But before the postseason, it's the offseason already for 18 organizations around the league. And Joe, currently, including the Cowboys' expiring contract next week with Mike McCarthy, there are 5 head coaching vacancies around the NFL. 3 of them happened during the regular season, including, of course, the New York Jets. A lot of questions for Woody Johnson and family to figure out this offseason. Quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, and of course, head coach and general manager. Here are some head coaching candidates that have been reported for Gang Green as of this moment. Aaron Glenn, the talented defensive coordinator of the Lions. Brian Flores, who put together a masterpiece of a year in Minneapolis. Arthur Smith, former Falcons head coach and current offensive coordinator of the Steelers. Matt Nagy, former Bears head coach, current OC in KC. Bobby Slowick, who last year was the hottest guy in town, it's kind of dropped off a little bit. And Josh McCown, former NFL quarterback, currently working under Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota. Plus a slew of others, including one interview that is happening today, a familiar face and name for this Jets franchise. Rex Ryan, welcome back to East Rutherford or Florham Park, perhaps.
Yeah, we didn't have enough room to also put Mike Cardano, Greg Sussman, I believe Mike Blewett was on there, Joe Freeze. I mean, you anybody and everybody within a 30-mile radius of MetLife has actually gotten an interview for the New York Jets. And, oh, yeah, by the way, we're still no closer to finding a general manager who actually knows what they're doing, Ben, which is also mind-blowing when you consider all of the time being wasted with the coaches and not enough time being put into figuring out who the general manager is and what is their vision and what is their coach of choice.
And that's really a key part of this component as well. When exactly does that hire happen of the GM? Does it happen before, simultaneously, after the hiring of the head coach? You would assume before, so that guy is on board with who his head coach is. So there is a mash up in management but it is the New York Jets. So here's where you'd actually be wrong, though, Joe Ranieri. Homedale, New Jersey is about 44 miles away from MetLife. So some of the great people working out at our New Jersey studios, not exactly in consideration. I have a better chance being here in New York City, and yet I have not received word from Woody Johnson or his son just yet. You mentioned all the head coaching interviews, 10 GM interviews already on the docket. Do you think, Joe, with where the New York Jets stand as an organization, 14 consecutive seasons missing the NFL postseason, it is the longest active drought by far in the National Football League, as we learned yesterday in a trivia game. The Colts, who last made the playoffs in 2020, is the second longest drought in the AFC, and the Jets have that beat by more than a decade virtually. In half of those 14 seasons, New York has won 5 games or fewer. Do you consider the Jets' job a desirable one in the NFL?
No, nobody considers it a desirable one because in all of this time frame, the only thing you're going to attract in New York are misfits, toss-aways, guys that are willing to do anything for a job. Why? Because they still haven't started from the top to work their way down. Ownership and Woody Johnson, one of the worst in the NFL. We all know it. There's dysfunction from the top, and when there's dysfunction starting at the top, if you don't get that straightened out, anything and everything else you do from that point on is just laughable, and that's exactly what the Jets are, laughable.
And so when you look at the 5 vacant jobs, including the New York Jets, the New Orleans Saints, the Chicago Bears, potentially the Dallas Cowboys included in this because they don't have a head coach as of next week at this moment, with no contract extension being offered to Mike McCarthy right now. And then the one that we learned yesterday, the Jacksonville Jaguars, I'm not really sure which is the most desirable. Technically, you would think Chicago, first overall picking Caleb Williams, who showed some optimism and a pretty talented roster despite how disappointing this season was. But good things go to die, sadly, it seems, under the McCaskey family of this Bears organization. Everybody is already spooked by Trent Baalke continuing to be the GM in Duval County. Quotes yesterday from some potential head coaching candidates that have said there is no movement forward in Jacksonville as long as Baalke is there. That was a stunner around the NFL. I would say probably the Saints' job, but you don't really have the quarterback in place to really make it all that desirable. And then you've got the Jets and the Cowboys, which is also its own quandary because Jerry Jones still wants to be the alpha in every room.
And suddenly, Ben, Bill Belichick, the North Carolina, makes a ton of sense, does it not? Yes, it does, folks. And now you know why. Unbelievable. The vacancy is not one desirable job among them. It's not for a guy with a resume like Belichick anyway, but for the guys who are like Rex Ryan, heck, it's gold rush time here, Ben. I mean, my interview with everybody, because all of those franchises are going nowhere fast.
I hope you get some free food, Rex, and get to enjoy your visits around the National Football League. Injury news for teams still playing. Good football teams that have reached the postseason. Again, difficult injury news for Green Bay on one front, more hopeful news on the other. Let's start with the bad. Christian Watson injured in the regular season finale against Chicago. He is having season-ending surgery to repair a torn ACL. Not just bad news for the playoffs for the Pack, but putting his status in question for the start of 2025. But Jordan Love, who exited the game in the opening half and then was warming up on the sideline. Matt LaFleur said after the game that if it was truly necessary, Love could have stayed in the game. He is expected to be, quote, okay for Sunday in Philadelphia against the Birds.
Yeah, I don't like the okay because nothing about his play has been okay, or the play calling for that matter, over the last couple of weeks here with the Packers. And now you're losing weapons. Yikes. Not exactly the best spot here for the Green Bay Packers heading into a big game against the Eagles. But like you said there, are we sure Jalen Hurts is playing in this game? Anybody?
So that's the quarterback matchup to pay attention to. Back to that graphic pretty pleased. Jordan Love dealing with what Pro Football Doc Dr. David Chow called a funny bone contusion. Should be fine. Really no lingering effects. But there have been lingering effects for Jalen Hurts, who remains in concussion protocol. Injured now 3 weekends ago, early in the opening half, week 16, against the Washington Commanders. Not a big deal week 17 against the Cowboys to clinch the division, or, of course, last week in the finale against the New York Giants. Joe, it really becomes a story tomorrow when the practice week opens up on Wednesday if Hurts is not out there.
It's a big problem, yes. And the fact that he's still in the concussion protocol is a little concerning here, because it's not exactly easy to get out of it, Ben. And if he's still in it, there's some issues there. So that's a lot of uncertainty surrounding the Philadelphia Eagles right now without him.
What changes in 48 to 72 hours that hasn't already evolved in the last couple of weeks to get him out of the protocol? Zay Flowers listed as day-to-day. That's coach speak. We don't expect to see Zay Flowers this weekend as Baltimore hosts the Steelers, or maybe even next weekend if they reach the divisional round. And again, I wonder, Joe, as we'll talk about the line a little bit later for that matchup Sunday in Philly between the Eagles and the Packers, if it is taking into account right now Jalen Hurts' status being up in the air, or if it is expecting Hurts to start 4.5-point spread in favor of the Eagles. Action around the association up next.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start, so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
The NBA will take center stage once football stops, and people will watch the NBA playoffs and all that. But the standings are whacked out in the Western Conference. Like Oklahoma City, Memphis, and the Houston Rockets are the best teams in the conference.
You want to talk about a team with overs and no defense? The Wizards are your team. It's unbelievable. They can't make a total high enough. It's nuts.
Sports Rage tonight. Weeknights 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Only on SportsGrid.
Louis Riddick has interviewed for every job in North America. And I'm not just talking football. I'm talking about every business in North America of any kind whatsoever. Tire companies, grocery store CEOs, shopping malls, insurance companies. What job hasn't Louis Riddick interviewed for?
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
A 9-game slate in the NBA on a Monday night to start a new week. To recap for you here on a Tuesday morning, bright and early on the early line on SportsGrid. Some market movement yesterday for a matchup in the city of brotherly love. The Philadelphia 76ers, the Phoenix Suns. Two teams not really playing basketball as we expected, at least at the level of success entering this season, where injuries, inavailability of star players has been the main reason why. Yesterday, Joe, early in the day, the Sixers were a 3.5, 4-point favorite as Philly was expecting to see Joel Embiid. He was ruled out. Line flips to Phoenix, trying to snap a 4-game slide. They close as a slight road favorite inside Philadelphia. And that's exactly what ended up happening. The Suns win by double digits, 109-99 in Philly. Again, covering as a slight 1.5-point favorite, snapping a 4-game losing skid. The Suns had also entered last night in Philadelphia, dropping 7 of their last 8, 10 of their last 13, and it only covered 3 times in that 13-game span. So a win and a cover last night that was dramatic. Why? Because of the availability and status of one of the Suns' stars. Bradley Beal, team high 25 points off the bench, coming off the bench for the first time in 9 years.
Yeah, which was an interesting move, but something had to be done there with Phoenix on a 4-game skid. And, Booker hadn't helped since his return here. So it felt like a team that was trying to find any sort of combination to get something positive out of a game. And really, maybe the best thing to happen in that game was learning that Embiid was going to be sidelined there with the foot sprain. And that was enough to motivate Phoenix to get out there on the road in a tough environment and actually win a game and break that losing streak. So kudos to them. I still don't trust Phoenix, though. And how can you? They're 16-18 on the season.
If the season were to end today, both teams would be on the outside of even the play-in tournament looking in. Both teams below 500. The Suns by 2 games, as Joe mentioned. Philly still 6 games, sub 500, 14-20. But the Sixers got off to a 2-12 start. They are 12-8 since. They entered last night inside the Wells Fargo Center, victorious in 5 of their last 7. Now make that 5 wins in their last 8 games. Tyrese Maxey having to do a lot, a game-high 31 points, albeit in a losing effort. Now we go to the Twin Cities, game-high 37 points for Anthony Edwards, who I think scored 28 or 29 of those in the final 2 quarters that led a dramatic comeback for the T-Wolves at home. Minnesota down by as many as 19 points in the second quarter, storms all the way back to win by 2, 108-106, depending on where you got this number and at what time during the day. I saw it right before tip last night at a flat 2 in favor of the T-Wolves. Either a cover, a push, depending on what side you were on. Minnesota this year, Joe, not great as a favorite. We'll call it a 2-point number, 10-18-1 against the spread. The Clippers kept it close, but they did lead by nearly 20 in that opening half. Regardless, the T-Wolves get a win behind a big night from the Ant-Man.
Yeah, and, it's good to see, Kawhi Leonard now at least back with the Clippers here. And talk about, you think the spread was close. The total was 214.5 right up until tip-off, in which it dropped to 214. So every half a point matters, and it certainly mattered in this game. But that's back-to-back performances now by Edwards. One was in a losing effort in which he dropped, 53 over the weekend. But he was able to carry this team offensively and get enough done in this one at home to win the game against the Clippers. And unfortunately, it feels like that's what it's going to have to be for Minnesota. It's going to have to be the Edwards show here until they can figure some things out.
Again, if you looked at the odds or the expectations for a new year in the National Basketball Association right before the season started in October, and then you were to refresh the standings and check where things are nearing the midway point of this season, teams playing 34, 35, 36 games right now of 82, you might be a little bit surprised. For instance, Minnesota, sky-high expectations despite the trade of Karl Anthony Towns in the offseason, a team that played in the Western Conference Finals, that entered that series against Dallas as the favorites to win the Western Conference crown. A win last night, just a game above 500, 18-17. You mentioned Kawhi Leonard back this week for his first 2 games of the year. 21 minutes last night, 8 points, 3 of 11 from the floor. Played in his season debut on Saturday against the Atlanta Hawks. A win for Minnesota by a narrow margin. The Memphis Grizzlies, one of the better teams right now in the Western Conference, and a big win last night at home in the Grind City against the shorthanded Mavericks. 119-104, the victory for the Grizz behind a big night from Jaren Jackson Jr. Triple J, 35 points and 13 boards. The Grizz cover as a 4.5-point home favorite.
Yeah, nice to be home, right? I mean, they got back from one of those 5-game road trips where they started to run out of gas a little bit towards the end of that trip. But, get home now, sleeping in your own bed, getting a depleted Dallas roster, exactly what the doctor ordered for Memphis. For sure. And quite honestly, it really wasn't even close for most of this game. So kudos to Memphis, who continues to win games they're supposed to win and cover, Ben, and cover.
The Mavs now 1-5 without Luka Doncic, who got injured on Christmas Day, including 5 consecutive losses, their last 4 as a dog. Yep. No covers in those 4 games as an underdog. Memphis does continue to cover, 17-8 against the spread as the favored side this year. The Grizz started 8-7. They then won 14 of their next 17. Joe, you mentioned the road trip. They had dropped 3 of their last 4 entering last night. So back to winning ways. Memphis and Houston right now currently kind of in a toss-up for that second-best record out west behind OKC. 24-13 for the Grizzlies. The only preseason NBA bet that I made, Memphis over its team total of 45.5. Yep. Feeling pretty good about it, nearing the midway point of this season. A national championship night in Frisco. That's next.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the game starts so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
The NBA will take center stage once football stops, and people will watch the NBA playoffs and all that. But the standings are whacked out in the Western Conference. Like Oklahoma City, Memphis, and the Houston Rockets are the best teams in the conference.
You want to talk about a team with overs and no defense? The Wizards are your team. It's unbelievable. They can't make a total high enough. It's nuts.
Sports Rage tonight. Weeknights 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Only on SportsGrid.
He will never repeat this year again as he gets older. It's not happening. That's not the way the world works. In the NFL, when you get older, your numbers dive. That's all there is to it.
Why did you play him for as long as you played him against Dallas if you weren't going to play him this week to break the record? I mean, you left him in that Dallas game forever.
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
An FCS National Championship game last night in Frisco, Texas, for the final year in Frisco before they changed destinations starting in 2025. There was one powerhouse entering the game, and there was one powerhouse at the FCS level exiting the game. But it wasn't the expectation for the FCS national title matchup last night between North Dakota State that powerhouse and Montana State. In fact, the Bobcats were a 4.5-point favorite against the Bison. That's MSU against NDSU. Tommy Mellott had led his Montana State team to the 1 seed in the FCS postseason bracket in a perfect 15-0 record entering last night's national championship game. But Cam Miller and the Bison on the other side, there to remind everybody who the dominant team is in FCS college football. 35-32, the victory for NDSU. Outright as a 4.5-point underdog. A total of 58 and a hook does sky over. Joe, there are dynasties in sports, and then there is North Dakota State football at the FCS level. 10th national championship for NDSU last night. It's the most in FCS college football. No other program even has more than 6. All 10 crowns coming in the last 14 years. 5 of the last 8 seasons, a national championship. What about the 4 years that North Dakota State did not win a national championship? One of the years they played in the national championship game. They have reached the semifinal in 2 other seasons, being part of the Final Four. Their worst season was the COVID year of 2020 because a guy that started for the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday, Trey Lance, foregone, whatever the word is, his final season to get ready for the NFL. Regardless, the story is this. North Dakota State remains a powerhouse at the FCS level, and if you ever see them getting points in a national championship game, you should probably take them, unlike me, who laid the 3.5 with Montana State.
Yeah, it's unfortunate there. The over, though, was thanks to a big fourth quarter, Ben, but a lot of storylines in here. First of all, North Dakota State to be a dog was kind of head-scratching to a lot of people, especially the quarterback play of Cam Miller this year was over the top between him and that wide receiver, Bryce Lance. My goodness, did they show up and show out last night? And really, from the get-go, we're all over Montana State. Give them credit that they were able to make this thing a game and came back, because it was all North Dakota State early and often in this game. And they were also trying, Ben, a very exclusive club. Not a lot of teams have gone 16-0 in the FCS and win a championship. They had an opportunity to do that. Last team to do it, of course, North Dakota State in 2019 with Bryce's older brother and, like you mentioned, Trey Lance there. So I was impressed with some of the players here. Don't forget, a lot of coaching tree in North Dakota State, too. Kleinman was there for a while, too, as well. Won a championship, right? So call me crazy. That's a football program worth keeping an eye on.
Tim Polasek, the new head coach this year in Fargo, taking over for Matt Entz, who left North Dakota State to be the linebacker coach at USC. Polasek was with Craig Bohl, who was coaching at Wyoming. Bohl, great success at North Dakota State as well. And, Joe, you mentioned Cam Miller. 320 scrimmage yards last night, or at least $199 through the air, 121 on the ground, 19 of 22 in his passing game, 4 total touchdowns. On the other side, the Walter Payton Award winner as the best offensive player at the FCS level, Tommy Mellott, MSU starting quarterback, 330 scrimmage yards and 3 total touchdowns. What a show it was. But Caden Steindorf, the punter for NDSU, a walk-off punt to win it. It was a 21-3 lead for North Dakota State early in the opening half. Montana State rallied in the third quarter to make it a game in a very exciting fourth and final stanza. But again, the Bison are the Bison. The Bison are the beasts of the FCS level. 10 national championships in the last 14 years. Not a ton of college basketball last night. A big Tuesday night slate will get you set for, especially in the SEC. Houston beats TCU, winning by 19 as an 18.5-point closing favorite. A wild one in Minneapolis at the Barn between the Gophers and the Buckeyes in double overtime. Big win for Wisconsin on the road in Piscataway. Hour number 2 up next.